explore, in other words, as we discuss professionalism, we especially I want you to interrupt me as we go through this. It's first of all unique in this industry. 40% of all non-managerial jobs in hospitals are held by workers who consider themselves professional, leaving out management. Now that's very important. Whether they are or not, they consider themselves professional. The industry is especially, there's no question, first of all, that the hospital workforce is relatively highly skilled. Let me remove that question. There's no question about that. You know, we know all the fact that we immediately identified large numbers of trained and licensed nurses, of technicians, etc. Leave aside that a minute and let's look at it as a workforce. No question about that. What is peculiar is beyond what we know is that almost every technical trained category has pretensions of professionalism. It doesn't matter what new thing is invented. 10 years ago, will any of you raise your hand that ever heard of inhalation therapy? You follow me? It doesn't matter what new thing they bring in, what new piece of equipment, you see. Maybe a CAT scan cleaner in the next few years. If they get enough CAT scanners laying there, will require a maintenance, a professional maintenance organization. The pretensions arise. We're going to see they're not phonies, these people. They're in an atmosphere dominated by the guy I erased up here. I really don't ever mean to erase him. He stays here. You're going to see in a few minutes. The MD influence is the permanent influence that's causing all of them to jump and act the way they act. Let's take a technician of a very high order, as we have, for instance, in the Raleigh-Durham, in the Triangle area down there. Burroughs Wellcome's international headquarters is in that area around Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina. They moved from London, England. That means you have the highest level. They brought over at least 500 British, corporate officials and high-level technicians, so forth. I've never heard one of those technicians for a drug company, for instance, ever speak of his professionalism. And some of the jobs they do are 10 times, say, more complex than, and what they require in training, and some of them may actually have master's level. They don't even think of it, you follow me? They just want to pay for it, you know what I mean, or something. That they may have master's level, but the idea of setting up a professional organization would never strike them. You got to understand something very peculiar going on in the healthcare industry, unlike any other industry. But a technician in a hospital, that same technician would obviously do so, and that doesn't make him or her a phony. It's the atmosphere of the hospital. There is rampant professionalism. You think of it, x-ray techs, inhalation techs, physical techs, a host, all with their own professional organizations, all with their own ethical codes, all with their own publications, conventions, changing dues, levels of membership, etc. We could define what we mean by a profession. And I don't want to define that only doctors and lawyers are professionals, okay? But to begin with, it's supposed to be somebody that is put by society on a higher status and recognized by all of society on a higher status because it's in society's interest to distinguish that individual and to single them out and to expect of them a higher level of performance. We expect of a priest or a minister, total confidentiality in talking with them and these kinds of things. We expect certain things of this kind of thing. Now, there's no question that society has granted the medical profession a monopoly, a legal monopoly in law in every one of the states over the performance of certain functions and an absolute autonomy in carrying them out. Remember that. No one else has that level. They police themselves. They determine who will and won't be. They control and sit on their own medical licensing board rather than other people. Let's take prescribing drugs. Some terrible legislative fights take place if, say, optometrists wish to prescribe eye drops, okay? Because ophthalmology, you see what I mean? The lines are very tight by law, by licensure. Let's take the surgical practice. First of all, you're young and I'm older. But how long do you think this has been around? Think it's been around long? Do you think the medical profession was always treated like this? On this high status? You think it always was? I'm getting a yes back there. Anybody want to venture a guess if it always was? Okay. But it didn't include surgery. Who did surgery up till 100 years ago? Barbers. Barbers did surgery. That's what that red and white pole is for. When you see it in these towns, you see that's the place to eat where the blood is shed. You see, he gets out his razor and he did it, okay? You got to go back and understand that there was no monopoly on surgical practice until society decided. Now let's take doctors in our country. We think of medical doctors, MD, and then we think of a very small minority of what's the other kind of doctor? Huh?
Yes.
Osteopathic doctors now, okay? But up till the Civil War, there were at least 12 kinds of doctors. And they were all rampant and over the lot. And if you read medicine like you read law, like Lincoln went to somebody and read law with him for 3 months and then became a lawyer. That's how you became a doctor. You went with one of these guys. You rode around in his wagon with him, right? And you delivered a baby a few times. And you see what I mean? There was not the status issue. It's when the establishment in a nation decides to give them a special status. Now, when do you think that occurred in this country? When did they decide to end there were a lot of doctors and they never made any money. They were all over the place. They made more than a steel worker did or a miner, but they didn't make a lot of money. Not like a merchant, not like a banker. They were not like they are today. It's not until 1910 that the Rockefeller and the Carnegie Foundations, that's when you know. If I say Fairmont Field Club, do any of you doubt I'm talking about the establishment? Now, if I say Rockefeller and Carnegie in 1910, you don't have to doubt that big business and Wall Street and the people that run this country have made a decision. They are going to limit this thing down. They're going to close about half the medical schools in this country, and they're going to give doctors a status for the balance of them that are left around, and they make a decision, you see. And then the licensure laws change, and they give all the older ducks a grandfather clause. They can all continue to practice, but they can't. When they die off, they're gone. See, and they get rid of the mail order doctors and the 3-month readers and the 1-year readers, you see, and everybody's got to at least go to college for a year. They set very minimal standards. At least go to college for 1 year and at least go to one of these med schools. Okay, it takes them until 1926 to get the 1/2 of the medical schools closed down in the U.S. Some of them were so terrible that there was not even any opportunity for anatomy. They had no cadavers. They had no teaching of whole aspects of things, but they called themselves medical schools, issued MD degrees. Okay, that is a profession, okay? It's the clearest example of a profession and the power of a profession. Now, why in health services do we have such professionally, occupationally dominated divisions of labor? Well, first, health services is unlike, say, the computer industry. It's a labor-intensive industry. That's very important to know. What's not a labor-intensive industry? The best example I can think of would be an oil refinery. Turns out tens of thousands of gallons of oil a day, and with very few guys pushing buttons, and a few maintenance guys, unlike a coal mine. That's labor-intensive again, okay? But health services is very labor-intensive. It depends much more for its means of production on the skills and the knowledge and the labor of the people who work in it than of the machines. They have machines, but it depends much more on the people. And therefore, any effort to change anything, monopolize anything, or benefit from anything, like a new machine or a CCU, can create very direct and conscious intervention by the MDs. I'm going to put them up here. And if I start to erase them, I want you all to shout like one. Stop. I mean, they stay here all the time. I got them down like they weren't. They stay here all the time. You're going to see now how they intervene. They can't afford not to watch everything going on, because they used to do everything. Get it? Everything going on was once theirs. Then they let the nurses do part of it. So they have a lot to do with nursing licensure, a lot to do with what nurses can do or can't do, how nurses are supervised. The 20th century, the end of which we're in the 82nd year of it, has seen the most enormous expansion of this healthcare market due to technological developments and huge infusion of capital since 1950 into hospitals especially. And above all, we've seen the expansion of financial support through third parties, through collective bargaining insurance agreements, through funds and union funds and management funds, and through government, of the payment for all of these services that have infused this money. And this increase in the industry, which is like this, it's the fastest rising industry. Others rise like this, and others like auto and steel are in decline. This one continues on the fastest, sharpest increase up in people, in capital, in growth. Now, even though it has grown like this, the physicians have kept solid the fact that only physicians can legally practice medicine, and so they've not allowed a huge growth in the numbers to keep up with this growth. They've therefore had to delegate more and more, and that has resulted in what I call this rampant professionalism. I want to discuss it with you. They have very consciously caused people of a lower status by their own controlled development to receive much lower paid remuneration for the delegated authority. Where years ago the radiologist came out and took the picture, okay, went back and developed it and then read it, he now delegates it. But his income won't just be 2 or 3 times that of the X-ray tech. It may be 20 to 60 or 80 times that of the X-ray tech, okay? And this, if you look at CCUs and ICUs, are a beautiful example. They've arisen right in the last few years. You all have seen them under your own eyes. They could have decided to keep all the jobs in them. They didn't have enough people for them, don't you see? The work is of a level for them. They've delegated to nurses at nurses' pay. Then they hold conversations over cocktails at Fairmont Field Club. Why, those son of the bitches in $11.99 are making $20,000 a year. It's unheard of. I mean, they sit there and the administrator's in total agreement with them and the businessmen are in total agreement and having a big ball and a big party over the fact that what they've done really is they've go through there and bill for a coronary care visit, CCU visit every day at a much higher rate to the insurance company, right? And the nurse is actually policing the life and death problems 24 hours a day of those problems, subject to calling the doctor. Go back. I'm not attacking doctors. I love them. I hire them by the dozen. I work with them. I'm in a school of medicine, okay? I love them, especially the humane and decent and progressive ones. I love them more, that's all. You know, it's like you love women and you love some women more, okay? I mean, but as a group, they really are nice people. I am describing, as a surgeon ought to describe, an industry to you. I'm taking apart an industry for you, and I hope none of you think that's personal or attacking anybody. I'm describing an industry. We must understand this industry. Now, if the specialized occupations that come down here by the droves are all in some way influenced and controlled by the superior organizations, you're going to end up with one or two like that then come down and further supervise and direct as the superiors, ones below them. And we're going to see examples of that now. Physicians, are we all clear, have an incentive not to do all of the work themselves, but to have it done in an economic sense by those who can do it for lower pay. And those subordinate health occupations are dangerous low-wage substitutes for physicians, and therefore they must never stop their control. They must never cease it. And let us examine it. Each set of technologists and technicians working under a medical specialty is more highly skilled within that field than a physician outside the field. Can we agree on that? That the X-ray tech probably knows as much about when there's a fracture on that film, the reading of the film like a radiologist, than does a GP, say, especially in the town of F, okay? Not Fairmont, speaking of another very important place in this town, and other places, okay? All right? They know very little about it. The tech knows more. He can usually say it's a hairline fracture, it's not. Even if some of you have worked with them late at night, you know they know before the doctor gets there, right? So watch that. The nurse in CCU knows more about coronary care than surgeons of all sorts and surgical subspecialists do. Would you all disagree with that? And in many cases, knows more than Mary Green doctors who should know more, and because they care for people in that area. To assure that these subordinate occupations remain subordinate, and for the economic benefit of the superior occupation, there is then a very important set of rules. First, the subordinate professionals must never compete in a way that is a disadvantage to the superior. Now let's call these RNs down here. You're going to see they have something to do with people below them, okay? And their levels of licensure and coding and all. So as a corporate group, the doctors keep all the subordinates under control to protect the privileged position of medicine as a whole on top. In turn, even though I gave you evidence earlier up here on the other boards that many hospital workers have partly become almost like industrial workers, even nurses in their moods at times of militancy, it is equally important that their professionalism to these doctors be the single big ingredient in their mind, and that to that extent they remain very separate from the other workers. So they do this by urging that they accept, and the nurses and most of these groups have accepted, the physicians' models of adoption of ethics, of licensure, of educational control, and of employment monopolies in their own field. And they delegate that to them and they back them in it. And each subordinate occupation now has an incentive, just like a craft union in the building trades. You've heard about all their big in construction. You know, it's very important, like whether electricians or iron workers, you know, who messes with the door? Who deals with an electric door in an airport? Is that an electrician? Is that a carpenter because it's a door? You see what I mean? Every bit of this is encouraged to the hilt. You have extremely complex sets of conflicts over the territory of occupations. You don't have that in any other industry. And you get the minds of nurses and of technicians onto all this stuff, you follow me? Like, why shouldn't the inhalation therapists have become part of physical therapy, or part of nursing, but are part of something else, a lab techs, you see what I mean? EKG people actually have job classifications and set up organizations, even though it's unclear exactly how long it takes to train. The training we know is very minimal, in terms of time. The AMA then, the master organization, serves as a holding company with each specialty of doctors having subspecialty organizations. You all know that. The American College of Radiologists, the American College of Pathologists. Now watch. Each of them is given authority to control, see, these are MD, little MD lots, okay? Radiology. MD pathology. I'm just going to take a few of them, follow them out, okay? Now these are MDs with their dollars, with their power. They're given authority right from here, so that the X-ray techs, right, need the support of them. The ASCP, you look at the standards, go read their constitution. You read about who they're sponsored by, right? Will be the MD pathologists, okay? That's to be certain that they're not going to come back and either be competitors, and that they'll remain in an eternally subservient position. In turn, these people are given authority by these people who have got their authority here to control, what's the next one called, CLAs, or see what I mean? It goes on down the line, right? And this elaborate system, there's two things then. If the unskilled and the semi-skilled have moved in the direction of industrial workers, and if I said Fairmont was on the cutting edge with an 1199 local amongst its professionals, that was due to the extraordinary things that happened here and the stupidity of management. Most managements are not that stupid. They, for many years, hold this off, and they keep them divided on a much bigger scale. They encourage the ANA in and all this kind of thing. Here, all this was brought to a huge heat, so that while they are separate from the others, you still, I think, can follow the logic of the ways in which they too have conflicts. There is like a split of sorts and debates that take place within the workforce that are unfortunate, but come out of this history. And you shouldn't blame it on the locals or blame it on the individual. It's the history and of the way in which it has been handled by the people on top. It's deliberately designed to have linkage to the specialty colleges. Now nurses don't. Nurses come down in a straight line. An LPN licensure may require that so many licensed, registered nurses sit on the board that licenses the LPNs. That's their measure the doctors have given them. You see, of delegated authority to keep control. Now, you do not have this in any other industry, and if I've taken time to go off onto it, it's because the history of this is extremely important and different than anything else. There isn't any way in the world in which car mechanics would, want to take control of somebody else. You follow me? It's no other industry would people who even make a lot of money want this kind of thing, The coal mines, despite them making $30,000 a year, remain industrial unions. The guys at the face of the coal, the motormen, the mechanics, the electricians, somehow, as skilled as their fields are, as much as they could make, they remain in some sense, a proletarianized body that would know that they are single working class. These people don't. They've been knocked about so that it's a much more complex issue. It means from a management point of view, management can have more divisive tendencies to exploit if it cares to, or it can overdo it as they've done it and get a backlash. Now, let's talk about this hierarchy of health professions in another way. They're also taught as part of this process to have an internalized sense of their own place, each group, in the bigger scheme. I'd like to deal with the nurses for a minute, even though I've dealt with them in a short way in dealing with the others. Nurses, RNs, certainly are in an intermediate position between physicians and subordinate to physicians, but in a supervisory role with respect to LPNs, aides, or several other kinds of semi-skilled workers, depending on the work setting. Remember that ideologically, the nursing profession combines anyway the authoritarianism that's necessary for the nurse's supervisory role, blended, usually in a female way at about 98%, with the submissiveness implicit in the relation to doctors. And many nurses, have learned to handle this very complex thing either because of their nature, and others have elements of rebellion inside them as they see the contradiction of the whole thing. In a way, this mixed status of submissiveness, to the doctor and at the same time supervision, some people think come naturally to nurses because of two factors. Overwhelmingly, the registered nurses are women, and overwhelmingly they come from the lower middle class. And as a class, it likes to look down on the people who come from the hollers where everybody's on welfare, or who, can't do any better than people on food stamps. You see what I mean? Lower middle class people are a pain in the butt, even though many of us, have origins in it in the sense that they like to look down because they know they'll look down on. You follow me? Somebody can tell by their accent or something that they don't have this education or that, or somebody can tell by the family or this or that, and they're therefore very hung up on status anyway. A lot of this is just free editorial comment to go with the scientific analysis, you understand. They, remember, have a high enough economic status and class background to have afforded nursing education. And you would be a very odd nurse, many of you, if you haven't met an aide who knows a hell of a lot more and has learned a lot more in her own way, or could actually run an entire department because they've actually learned it and run it on the night shift or something. If you haven't observed that, you haven't observed enough. You follow me? That person simply didn't finish high school. That person simply never could take off for a year, or two to go get the education, but they have the qualities of leadership and the guts and the decision-making capability. Now, where did all this come from? The intellectual leadership of Florence Nightingale, whose job was to blend the upper-class Victorian lady's character. That was what she said when she founded the profession. It had to have character. And what she meant by that was the way things were 100 years ago, whenever that year was. For the doctor, she brought the wifely virtue of absolute obedience. I'm summarizing the Nightingale theories, okay? And the nurses who care to smile at this better remember the origins of their profession. To the patient, she brought the selfless devotion of a mother. And for the lower level hospital employees, she brought the firm but kindly discipline of a household manager accustomed to handling servants. God help you if you mess with 550 on that basis. She desired none of the doctor's skills or prerogatives because his professionalism stemmed from the masculine realm of scientific thought, and hers from a kind of innate feminine spirituality. That's a summary by an excellent writer of the ideological basis of nursing. I get jolted if I were to believe any of that, since I just finished a class with second-year medical students. And by the way, at North Carolina, 36% for the last 3 years of the entering classes are women. The seminar I was leading had 50%. And those mean some changes for the future, as well as the things we're talking about, okay? They could be worse or they could be better. Some people think women bosses are worse than men bosses, in offices and all, and some nurses may believe, I don't exactly look forward to that. On the other hand, there are going to be changes. All I'm saying is we're discussing change. Now, the Nightingale element of Victorian character has been replaced by what today? The hallmark of class for a nurse is the 4-year liberal arts program. It's obvious that is where character lies today. I hate to stand in Fairmont State College with all of the AAs in front of me and have to remind you of that. And if the nurses' professional organizations could have their way, professional nursing, that is, the supervisory roles, would be restricted to the graduates of 4-year college-based nursing programs. Now, if you think Big Daddy cares about that debate, you're mistaken. He'll turn loose of that debate because it represents no threat to MDs whatsoever, that level of debate. Other things may represent a threat. Remember, he has seen to it that the baccalaureate nursing education program is no richer in scientific content than the old nurses training or the hospital training. All it takes now is a smattering of the 4-year programs now have the liberal arts courses added on to make sure that in place of the Victorian lady who is going to bring wifely virtues, there is now a nurse who is one class and slot above her subordinates. I guess I'll change this speech if they invite me to lecture over at WVU on anything. This might go over better here than there. How about the other sub-medical hospital workers? If nursing to any of you appears narrow, then all of the other professions are so much narrower, than nursing. Nursing still has a breadth, a great breadth to it, great diversity to it. And each one of them, I must emphasize this because it is not in the history books and it isn't taught this way. Each one of them is a spin-off of a doctor function. If they're drawing blood, if they're looking at urine, it's things that doctors just a generation or two ago did in their own offices. Don't you see? It doesn't matter. All of you must know without even talking to your parents that there were pieces of x-ray machines in every doctor's office. That he shot the film, he went back, he developed it, he read it for himself. There wasn't all this subspecialization of highly differentiated occupations. So as the functions have been spun off by the medical profession to account for this huge rise that I put on the board, medical technology in all of its aspects and at all of its categorical levels, inhalation therapy, physical therapy, and all of them are relatively new so-called allied health professions. And remember that because in the lecture 2 weeks from now, I'm going to read you a speech by the dean of a very big school of allied health professions on some matters that you'll be able to put your own critical intelligence to and realize how low level some of these schools have become when they stray onto the political field of whether, say, poor people ought to get care or not, and that kind of thing, and what they're teaching their people. Now, many of them, truthfully, lack even the dubious independence. It's a dubious independence, which the ANA, in my ways, I have a lot of admiration for what the ANA sometimes says in its statements and all, about the medical profession, about what it ought to. It ought to have the right to practice independently. The nurse practitioners ought to be able to hang out a shingle in the position of sit, and those kind of things. Most of the rest of them, they lack that amount of independence, which even this is a dubious independence. And I only refer you to X-ray techs or AFCP to remember that they don't dare argue too loud because they are sponsored, and if you look at their charters, the way they word it. Let me read you so you get this ideology and get it more clearly. The accreditation of the schools for the training of almost all allied health workers, the accreditation, is controlled by the AMA's Council on Medical Education. And it is jointly supervised by the allied professional society like AFCP or X-ray techs, jointly supervised by them and by the parent medical specialty. For example, the American College of Radiology in the case of X-ray techs. Very important for you to grasp this. They control the membership, they control the association, they control the education into it, they control the ideology, they control the levels of competition it could ever go to. Then, and the credo of a medical technologist. This is a quote from the American Journal of Medical Technology. As a medical technologist, I'm leaving it out with ... You know, the quotes I'm leaving out. I am proud, etc., of being one of a trio in the medical profession, the physician, the nurse, and the medical technologist, each of whom functions in his distinct way. I do not want to encroach upon anyone else's premises. That's pretty good. They like that sort of jurisdictional statement. There's going to be no encroachment, right? They're not going to hang out any shingles. They're not going to get any big ideas like the ANA about these kind of matters. I would, however, also like to quote briefly from a textbook that's given nursing students in recent years that makes rather clear where the ANA is making rather unclear some of these things, of what the primary source of personal satisfaction for a nurse should be. She sees nursing not just as a job, but as a lifetime career of human service. She doesn't just work at nursing, she is a nurse, a professional nurse. And you remember the earlier board, the meaning of work? This is what helps to make it difficult to get collective bargaining, although many of the nurses realize the needs for dealing with this huge capital investment, these huge administrative structures, the bureaucracy of the hospital. The advantages to the hospital of these workers are, first, that they're quickly alienated by the fragmented jobs, the differences between professionals and non-professionals, and the forces at work, which in reality, they're really there. They're not anyone's invention or management's, effort to split, even if it makes no effort, to obscure the needs for collective action around job hazards, health hazards, stress of the job, and these kinds of things. And therefore, for people like yourselves going in for health administration or for health care delivery, I would close this part and then hope we could have some discussion depending on what you'd like to talk about by just indicating that it is around these kind of issues that I see much of the manpower and woman power issues. The numbers are big. We don't need to keep repeating them or memorizing, those. They're on a constant series of changes up. That when you're going into a big industry, then if you read the Wall Street Journal as I do every day, then you don't need to be told that managers of General Motors by the thousands have been laid off, okay? That no one is immune in our society, follow me, from needing to protect their turf in other ways than through this kind of hopefulness that somehow reliance this way will do it. And if you think these issues are serious, then all of these issues joined with consumer issues and with the surplus of doctors that's expected before 1990, and what that may do to nurse practitioners, and what that may do to ending mid-level roles for many people. These are all economic issues at heart, and I present them to you in the same way we'd study the steel industry or the auto industry. I would like, with that, to find out any kinds of viewpoints any of you have, any questions of material I haven't covered. I've tried to present some materials just to stimulate I'm erasing them now only because we finished that. He still remains up there looking down on all this. Are there any issues that any of you see? Are there any questions any differences with the viewpoint I've presented? I'm not making a thesis or advocating anything. I'm suggesting that these are the kinds of aspects I presented here that cause divisions within a workforce that don't exist in others.
How do you feel about the professionalism? From my viewpoint, professionalism has been used against nurses specifically because I'm aware of that. To the extent that they've been, made to feel that because of the professionalism, they couldn't do certain things. But, I feel it's a contradiction because they're subtitled, professionals, but not always really treated as professionals or geared as professionals on pay scales and so on.
I've called it a contradiction, and I think you've stated the contradiction. They're called professionals, and very often are, terribly frustrated with that middle role. You mentioned pay scales, but you've also mentioned the way they're treated, and I think that latter is probably more important to the way they feel. That the doctor seldom asks the nurse's opinion. She knows, sometimes an aide knows more about what's in the patient's mind and the condition of the patient's mind. Watch them off. The lowest level of person often is the least person asked and may know. But the nurse nearly always knows more than he knows. I mean, she's been there. They usually come through, how you doing? Few doctors are trained as team people, really, to go to the nurse and say, how about briefing me on, these are my 6 patients, or, and the section you're responsible for, and what do you think about it? And what's your... So it would stimulate them, next time to maybe have better observations, more scientific ones, and look at the chart better, but I don't think much of that goes on. There's nothing in their training. You got to remember, the seminar I do is an effort to jolt medical students, into more awareness of other people, of patients. I don't think they're aware of patients. I don't think they're aware of the other professionals. And yet they go out into the world to be physicians. What do you think about the question you asked, though? Are you satisfied with your professional role if you're a nurse?
Yeah, I'm a nurse, but right now I'm not in a hospital setting because I became very frustrated with that type of setting. And I think that's the reason nurses have always been stereotyped and stagnated.
Are you in a public health or private office setting?
In education.
In education, okay. So you don't feel you're working as a nurse, or you're working as a nurse in a school setting, or what are you doing?
Yeah, it's sort of a sub-role of nursing. It's not really...
Right. It's not a principal nurse. Are there other nurses present? Is there any other comments? And then others join in. I mean, some of the others of you that serve in nursing or in technical capacities who said you worked when we had you to hold up your hands, what do you feel could be done to improve? What would you want if you had your druthers? You had some comments a while back.
I think, well, as far as professionalism, I think we just got more respect from the doctors. And we have in the hospital I work in now, we have no nursing judgment. So as far as...
Say that again, you have what?
We have no nursing judgment. We're not allowed to use any judgment at all.
Okay.
And as far as professionalism in that aspect, I feel like it's taken away from us because as far as I'm concerned, being professional is being allowed to use the education that we received and using it to help the patient. And not always, like you said, we're not, many doctors don't ask us what's wrong with the patient. And if you do tell them what's wrong and the patient says something else, the word is going to be against it. So I don't feel that we have treatment professionalism that we should have.
All the rest of you feel free to join in. Any other comments about what does this signify, if anything? Could this be a troublesome field? In other words, what we might be seeing is much less blue-collar conflict and strife. And, the balance of the 80s? It's possible, isn't it? And much more professional and white-collar action, Is that possible? Does this foretell some of that, or do you think the stabilizing things? I've given counter forces, too, reasons of division and professionalism will slow it up, but maybe they'll take off on their own, but there is a potential here. You were going to say something.
It's always going to be, people working in healthcare are always going to be hesitant to, get into any radical movement because it all comes down to people's lives.
Right.
If we go on a strike, and if every hospital in West Virginia went on strike, people in West Virginia would die in droves.
Right.
And, it's all stuff people don't think about.
However, in Canada and California, when the doctors were on strike, fewer people died.
Well, that's
That's documented data.
How about, that was an excellent comment, and I wish some of you would react to it or comment on it.
It's true, but I think it's something that can be used against people in the medical field because, every time someone's over mentioning the word strike in the medical field, it's like, you can't do that. People will die, people will suffer. And it's always been something that they've used to get to your moral ethics of saying that, but yet they expect you to tolerate a lot of things that they wouldn't tolerate, as physicians.
Okay.
Specifically.
Any others, comments? Let me stimulate your thought by reviewing something with you that bears on the point you just made, but in which an author has posed some counter questions to it. He reviews a classic strike. It happens to be of 1199 in metropolitan New York area in late 1973. But those of you that live here will see all the elements of it. It's a classic example of class conflict. Low-income strikers, by and large semi-skilled and unskilled, by and large black or Hispanic, and their union leaders were objects of ridicule of the boards of directors and medical staffs of the hospitals. And in truth, some strikers did act badly. Patient care may have been affected by their conduct. But within the hospitals, during the strike, there was a joyousness amidst the tension. For the doctors, the social workers, and the other health professionals not in the union, and for the members of the board of directors, for a few days, did the work of the people standing on the picket lines. They cooked the food, they fed the patients, they cleaned the toilets, they scrubbed the floors, they did the typing, they took the messages, and so on. On average, in life, these individuals earned from 4 to 40 times as much as the workers on the picket line. But they felt cleansed by their participation in these menial tasks in an almost religious sense for this brief period of time. Not only were they providing a useful service, but at the same time, they could feel righteously and indeed self-righteously indignant at those low-paid workers who had walked off their jobs. Now, that's his description, and then he poses these questions. Yet these high-income actors in this little drama would be horrified if they were accused of themselves of having been on strike for years. For the hospital boards of directors, were they not for many years standing apart from all of the needs of the poor communities in the large cities they were supposed to serve? And who is it that sat on the boards of directors of the hospitals? How many ordinary workers were ever permitted to hold seats? How many unionists? How many lawyers, real estate speculators, bankers, druggists, and well-to-do businessmen held the seats? And if philanthropy in this industry contributes less than 1% of the hospital's budget, why are 95% of the boards made up of those who are rich? If the hospital is serious about its business and its responsibility, why is the emergency room, or in the big cities, the outpatient clinics where low-income people and middle-income people get their care, why does it have such poor service and long waiting time? And why are the affluent doctors on the medical staff allowed to escape working regularly for days each week in those settings? Why are they often allowed to make incomes of up to $250,000, plus additional income from private practices, by the same boards of directors, yet walk away from accepting responsibility for the chaos of ambulatory and emergency room services in the USA? That's a pointed comment you might want to disagree with or see the irony of, as this person. You think it's possible that well-to-do people don't have to go on strike because when you own all the chips, you just sit still with them, right? And that may be part of the issues. I agree with you. I strongly agree with you in your criticism that, for instance, if doctors ever organized, they should not use the right to strike because they themselves could cut off all care. You follow me? And they may themselves find themselves, as I'm going to speculate 2 weeks from now, such a position. Did any of you want to disagree with that, or do you see the irony of it, or care to comment on it? You know, I think that self-righteousness we saw here in Fairmont. In other words, there is a feeling of righteousness, you follow me, that these people have really done something wrong in deserting people, you know, and who need care. And that has happened. It may be, you know, it was in the period obviously prior to 1199 and all, when the little people, you know, the ordinary workers, although they've gone out since, as 1199 has. Any other comments or criticism of the presentation? Please feel free to give your own views. Hopefully all I'm doing is stimulating you to think about these matters. As a management person, you may care to think about them and decide, well, I see now how to do this or that, you know, because I see the divisions amongst the workers. Or you may decide how to have an enlightened management view of some of this. But in either event, I thank you for your attention. I would like to give out just some tables and ask for you to, if I can find them, that is, to bring them to the 2 weeks from now, if you'll think of it. They're a reprint from something that I just bought that was published this very month, called The Salaried Physician, and all I did was copy some tables out of it, which are going to enable me to speculate. If you would hand out a few on this side and someone on that, why, there may be enough here. On one of 8 or 10 issues that we'll talk about that the future is going to make very interesting during, I think, a very rapid period of the 1980s. And all that gives you for the first time is somebody has brought together in one place although I disagree with some of the data, the fact that a tremendous number of doctors are moving into salaried positions, and what we can speculate what the significance of that's going to mean, you know, as that is happening over the country. Any other comments before we break up? I thank you for your kindness and patience and me being in the wrong room and all to start with.
Don't put it like that.
Thank you.